What's up, everybody? Welcome to CFP Talks. I am Joe Nissim, and as always, with me is my brother from another mother, my co-host, my main man's, the tracksuit wearing David Fuchs.
Tracksuit. I got a
Dave,
rep jersey. I got a rep jersey.
I gotta say something right off the
Yeah.
bat. The CFP is not the Series 7. And if somebody compares the Series 7 to the CFP one more time, I might I might actually pull my last hair out. And that's legit. It is not the Series 65. It is not the SEMA. It is not the CHFC. It is not the CHLU. We need to stop underestimating this exam and pretending that it's even close to any of these exams. I'm
Yeah.
getting to a point where I'm like, oh, we can't treat this like, oh, I'm going to study for 2 weeks and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to cram and take this exam. And if you're watching this right now and you just started digging into your CFP books, you're probably at the point where you're going, holy crap, what did I just get myself into? And if you are, you're not alone. It is a very common thing, myself included. I remember getting the review books and going, oh my God, what did I just get myself into? And I myself did the same thing in completely underestimating the scope of this exam.
It's not only even getting the books though, and that you just get completely slapped in the face when you get all the material. But I also think it's like even when you do get the material and even when you do get the books, I still think that people still at that point, underestimate the exam a little bit as well. And I could just speak from my experience because the first time that I took it, I got all the books, had all the slideshows, whatever. And yeah, that did slap me in the face like, oh shit, this is a lot of material. Like I didn't think it was going to be this much. But then like at the same time, I feel like people still think that they can kind of breeze through and figure it out and somehow pass the exam,
Yeah.
even seeing all the material that they're going to have. So I don't think it's just, underestimating how much material you're going to have to take. I also think people underestimate exactly how hard the actual exam is.
Well, you make a really good point because I think that once you start digging into it and you're in the same book for 2 weeks, and then you realize that there's three or four other books that you haven't even grazed yet, that's it. And I think the general idea is I get the books and I'm like, oh, that's not that bad. Or it looks like a lot, but I'm sure it's not going to be that bad. I think it's kind of that thing inside of us that just kind of like, oh, it'll be fine. And I can sit and breeze through it in a couple of weekends. If I just, dedicate a couple of weekends to it, I'll be in good shape. And
Yeah.
and then you start digging in, and then it's like, oh shit, I've been stuck on time value of money for 2 straight weeks. And even if you get yourself to that point where you're like, oh, okay, now I get time value money, and then you move on, and then it's 2 or 3 weeks later, and you're sitting there going, I don't remember how to do time value money.
Mhm.
And I think that is I will say this, that I think that this is the number one most common reason that people who take the exam and fail the first time around is that, and I don't want to say that, I don't know if it's, I just think people go in with the understanding that it's the Series 7. And you know how on Series 7, if you get a 67 on your mock exams, you could still go in and pass.
Yeah.
I've had this happen where I've worked with a couple students. They end up taking like their last mock exam. They get a 68, and you're like, and they just do enough and they get over the hump. And I think that's what people going into the CFP end up believing it's going to be. And like, oh, I can kind of like, I can't tell you how many times this has happened where I ask people, I'm like, how did you do on the mocks? And they're like, well, I got a 60. And I'm like, why did you take the test? Well, honestly, I thought it wasn't going to be that bad. Right. And granted, again, like maybe, and maybe I'm not looking at this the right way, but when I think about it, I'm like, maybe Series 7 has conditioned people to believe like you can kind of get away with it, or that,
That's what it is.
you
And
know,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's what it is. I think the seven and all these other exams have kind of conditioned people to think like this is just another exam that is just something I got to do and something that everybody does. And the way I look at it, at least, now, not when I went into it, obviously, but no, the way I look at it now is that you are going through a grueling process through the education, through the prep process, and passing the exam is really kind of like your graduation from what I consider to be almost like a graduate, an MBA program.
right,
I always say, when people ask me like, are you gonna go back to school to get your MBA? I'm like, fuck no, I got my MBA.
right,
It's called the CFP.
yeah,
And and that's the difference between the two exams. And that's why when people take the 7 and the 65 and all these other exams, and it's just like a quick, easy get the certificate like the SEMA or get the license, the 7. Who the fuck doesn't get that? Like that's what I think people kind of are conditioned for.
yeah.
And that's the difference, and that's why they underestimate it.
Yeah, and I think CFP board kind of knows that because they make the exam difficult on purpose.
Yeah.
And people are walking out going, well, I was expecting it to kind of be like there's even somebody who told me that they expected it to be like continuing ed, where like, yeah, the material was dense, but then like the questions were really easy,
Yeah. Well,
and
that
you're
that
like,
person must have gotten smacked in the face.
oh, like they came in like, we looked at their rubric and they were red on every section.
Yeah.
Like not even kidding, like not one section in the green. And they're like, I couldn't, I don't understand how I did so poorly. And I was like, because you treated a very difficult exam like it was continuing ed.
Hmm.
And again, you didn't give the exam the respect that it deserved. And I think also, one other thing that here was with underestimating the exam is you're going, if I start 3 months in advance, that's a really long time, right? And
Right.
so here's what ends up: you miss a day. It's not the biggest deal in the world. I got 3 months. Next week, I missed 2 days, had a rough day a week, went out drinking on the weekends, missed another study day. Now, all of a sudden, instead of being at 6 or 7 study days a week, you're closer to 4, 3 or 4. And that goes on for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And then you look up at the calendar and you're like, I'm a month away. That went by so fast. So not only did I underestimate the exam and overestimated my ability to get through the material and underestimated the material, but I also overestimated how long 3 months is. When somebody comes in and I put the study schedule together and you look at 3 months, it's like you get 10 days per topic.
Hmm.
And there's typically 10 subtopics per topic. So we're looking at 70 potential topics. That means if you cover one topic per day, one subtopic per day, you need a minimum of 70 days. I mean,
And
that's
that's just going through it one time too.
one time,
That's just going through it one time.
one time. And also assuming that when you read through it, you understand it.
Yeah. Well,
So
yeah, that's what I'm
who
saying. You go
learns
through it
time
one time.
value of money in a day? Who learns the gift tax in a day? Like those are dense, tough topics, right? So I think that ends up being really, really kind of I gotta say it's number one for me.
Number one
The
for me
number
too.
one reason why
Yeah.
people don't, and I encourage you to overestimate the exam. For anybody like if you're going in and you're thinking about CFP right now, you gotta overestimate the exam because here's the worst case scenario when you overestimate the exam. You end up studying really hard, you end up being ready early, and then you go and pass the exam on the first time. Oops.
Yeah. I was saying the worst case scenario.
That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is you ended up getting stuck on a bunch of topics and you had enough time.
Mhm.
And that's really the situation. Like you said in our video about emptying your cup, put yourself in a position to succeed. Give yourself extra time. Stop thinking that you're a robot that's going to like, okay, I see it, I understand it, now I can go and do it.
Mhm.
Close us up,
Yeah.
David. Take us home.
Yeah, I mean, well, I just I'm 100% with you. I definitely think that this is the absolute number one reason why people do not pass. And I think it's probably most common with people that take it the first time, obviously, because once you go through it, you're not going to make that mistake again unless you are just extremely stubborn or really dumb. But like for me, like that, this was the reason that I did not pass it was because I I remember I was in a wedding 3 weeks before. We did like a couples trip 2 weeks before I took it the first time. And I was like, yeah, like I'll study on the drive out to the wedding and I'll like review notes on the drive out to the beach. Uh that we have a long drive. I'll study on the train. And and then obviously I failed it. And the second time around is when I really committed myself to the process. And I just wish I had some type of like documentation of like the difference between the two, because you will see if you don't understand what we're talking about right now, when we say like underestimating the exam, if you could see kind of the documentation of the difference between the first time I took it and the second time I took it, you would absolutely understand what we're talking about.
Yeah,
So
it's not rocket science. Like the hours were there, but more importantly, the consistency was there.
yeah, but it's not just the hours though, because like anyone could just put hours in. And that's not the thing. It's taking the process seriously and you know not kind of skipping by because you think ultimately because you're underestimating it. That's definitely it's not because you didn't learn a state. It's not because you didn't you know stay up till midnight that one Tuesday night to study an extra hour. That's not it. It's exactly what we're talking about right now.
Hmm, I agree with that. I agree with that. Well said. All right, everybody. As always, questions, comments, concerns, send it to us, and we hope to see you soon.